like to say that, a true education is not about the transfer of information, it's about transformation. So if you see your obligation as an institution to transform the character, the intellect, the soul of the students who are in your charge, then you build a different kind of institution, you build a different kind of curriculum.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. This is the show where I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence to show how our worldview changes everything. If you like the show, please take a moment to review it on your favorite platform. That helps spread the word about these interviews with these amazing guests. Case in point, Pano Kanelos. Pano is the founding president of the University of Austin. Have you heard about this? It's been huge in the news of people who are frustrated with the way higher education is going. He's an outspoken advocate for reimagining what higher education looks like. And he's from the inside of these elite universities. Pano earned his PhD at the University of Chicago before teaching at Stanford University, the University of San Diego, Loyola University. Pano cares deeply that his campus is a place where open inquiry, free speech, and civil discourse are practiced. What? At a university? This is going to be a fun discussion. Let's welcome Pano Kanelos to the show. Pano Kanelos, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited about this conversation because you've founded a brand new university, along with a lot of other people who are concerned about the way things are going in our country, especially with elite universities, which is something that we have noticed in the past week or so on college campuses. Your program is called the University of Austin. Everybody's talking about it. This has been in process for several years, and you're welcoming your first class fall of 2024. So the timing could not be better for having our conversation here. Okay, so tell us a little bit about why a new university is needed rather than just, go into existing universities and try to change them. Give us a little of the story there.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to speak about this with you today. And to your question, it's interesting. You might imagine when we were originally thinking about this project, we had these conversations about the wisdom of going down this particular path. It's starting a new university is not an easy thing to do. In fact, it's very, very difficult. It's made difficult by the process of accreditation and the regulatory process and just the sort of sheer sort of resources you need to pull together to get it off the ground. So it's quite intimidating. In fact, we're located in Austin, Texas. We're the first new university in the state of Texas since 1963.
Wow.
So in 60 years, we've officially started in 2023. So that just gives you a sense. I mean, a place like Texas, which people associate with growth and associate with kind of economic dynamism, and that even in a place like Texas, it's been 6 decades since a new university started. I think that one of the reasons to start a new university is the fact that it is so difficult to start a new university. Somebody has to break through the ice. If we're going to have institutions that are going to offer competition to the current university system, that are going to try out new models, that are going to try and take higher education in different directions, we need an institution to be the snowplow, to get through all the regulation, to attract the students, attract the faculty, build out the institution so that others will follow. Look, I think we have not had a significant flowering of new institutions in the United States since like the 1880s, 1890s, where you had this sort of upsurge in new significant institutions like University of Chicago, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, Cornell. They were all founded at that time. And for over a century, things have just kind of gone fallow. And we're a country that builds things. We create things. We create competition. The fact that higher education hasn't been, creating the space for new institutions means that we're on a mission to make sure that space is there.
I love that idea. I had not really actually thought about flowering of a new institutions, and that it's well overdue. And you're speaking as a guy who your doctorate is from the University of Chicago, which is one of the top universities in the United States. You've taught at Stanford University, which is one of the top universities in the United States. It's not like you're just coming in saying, hey, we're going to be real radical here, and we don't have any credentials, but we're going to go against the flow kind of thing. You're coming at this as a serious academic. And I think that's what's grabbed people's attention about this. Mm. But you've been joined by a lot of other serious academics. I mean, highly credentialed people who are moving away from secure positions in these other universities to join you in Texas for this new venture. What's going on? Because I mean, from the outside, it looks kind of like professional suicide.
Well, I'll just give you some numbers. Since we began this project, we've received over 6,000 resumes from faculty at other institutions who are interested in joining us. We opened our first 20 faculty positions for searches this past fall, and during the past few months, we've received over 1,000 applications just for those 20 positions. And that number is smaller than the 6,000 because there are specific fields that we're looking for. Yeah. So it is harder to get a job at University of Austin as a faculty member than it is to become a student at any elite university in the country.
Yeah.
And I just think that speaks to the general sense of discontent or unease that faculty have at institutions across the country, that they feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with higher education as a whole, but also in many cases with their own institutions. And it also speaks to the fact that there's so many professors out there who really want to do something about it, who want to join a new university, who want to be part of a solution, who want to build something new. And they're willing to take a leap. They're willing to leave settled positions. They're willing to join, it's a risky thing to join a brand new university. I mean, we're just launching, getting off the ground, yet they're committed to doing that. And so, it's very heartening to me to be joined by so many other people from higher education. I've spent my whole career in higher education, as you noted. I've been a professor, I was a dean, and before I took this on, I was president of a small college called St. John's College and the East Coast. And so I've sort of seen higher education from multiple different positions and perspectives, and feel called to do something about it.
I'd love to talk about the distinctiveness, because I know there are a lot of parents watching this, a lot of Summit Ministries graduates who are in their teens, early 20s, trying to make a decision about, should I go to college? And fewer of them are making that decision. It's dropped from, I'd say, 95% intending to pursue higher education to somewhere around 80%. So it's a pretty substantial drop. They are not against higher education per se. They're against what they perceive is happening on campuses, where they're coming in and believing that their worldview will not be given a fair hearing, that they'll be essentially indoctrinated into somebody else's religious worldview. And they don't want to do it. They don't need it. They don't need it to make money. They don't need it to live a good life. But you're creating a different vision here, and I think we need to dig into it a little bit. What's the difference between a great university and just a university with a famous name?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that that decline tracks with the numbers of higher education in general. There are about 15% fewer students in higher education today than there were before COVID. So that tracks generally. And many of the students are leaving for the reasons you suggest, the sort of sense that universities are maybe hostile to their own values, things they hold dear, or that the return on investment, universities are so expensive, and to invest all that money up front, maybe for questionable outcomes. There are lots of reasons, I think, that young people are thinking twice about higher education. And that's a shame, because, we need young people to be shaped into the next generation of builders and leaders and creators. We don't want them to fully check out, although you can do lots of wonderful things without a college degree. Come from a family, I'm the very first to go to college in my family. My parents were immigrants and small business owners and that. So I have, my entire personal circle are people who don't have college degrees. My family circle and who have led wonderful, flourishing lives. A college degree is not a ticket to flourishing, but it shouldn't be an impediment to flourishing either.
Oh, great.
And what I would say is, what should a college be doing? What should a university be doing? I'm going to use two German terms. This may sound like an odd place to go, but in the early 19th century, there was a German educator named Wilhelm von Humboldt, who was sort of tasked with reinventing the German system of higher education. He founded the University of Berlin. And, he had thought a lot about what traditional universities had been doing up to that point. And from his vantage, he thought, well, the legacy institutions, the Oxfords and the Heidelbergs and the Sorbonnes and the Bolognas, all the great universities of Europe, had primarily been interested in transmitting received knowledge, right? That their job was to kind of carry forward a legacy. And therefore, they often had kind of very narrow, let's say, educational mandates. They were often denominational, and it was just sort of passing on the legacy, which isn't a terrible thing. But he said, universities, in addition to being the keepers and transmitters of legacy, should be places that also engage in the discovery of knowledge, that generate new ideas, that are the places where we come together and do our thinking about all sorts of different ideas and topics. And to do that, you have to have intellectual freedom, you have to have academic freedom. And so as he was building this university, he said, we need to put academic freedom, intellectual freedom at the heart of the university enterprise, and that the university should be fulfilling sort of two, let's say, roles. One is they should be engaging in the process of Bildung, which in German means, let's call it a kind of cultivation of the person.
Okay.
Right? A kind of education of the whole person. So you don't just go to a university to be stuffed with information and get some professional skills and go out. You have an opportunity while you're at the university to actually develop fully as a human being, to think about who you are, think about your place in the world, to come to understand the world around you better, so that when you leave the university, you have, let's say, a more developed moral and ethical muscle that will inform you do the rest of your life. And the other concept that he promoted was something called Wissenschaft. And Wissenschaft is the idea that all ideas are ultimately interconnected. That to really be an educated person, you have to study not just a single narrow discipline, but you have to become broadly conversant in philosophy and history and the sciences and all these things. So you develop as a human being and you come to know the world in as complex fashion as possible. And you do this by bringing people together who have different ideas about the world and who could share their ideas and share their experience in an environment of academic freedom. That's what universities should be. But we rarely find that nowadays. And so what we're really trying to do at the University of Austin is renew the promise that universities had at one point in their development. In fact, American universities, all those universities we talked about in that 19th century flowering, Chicago, Hopkins, Stanford, were actually inspired by Humboldt's vision.
Wow.
And so they took their cues and introduced into the American system the idea of the kind of comprehensive university, the idea that universities had to do with research and discovery of knowledge. But along the way, that kind of, that vision was watered down or lost. And we're trying to recover that.
I know a lot of students who are going off to major universities, and some of them they're huge. There's no way you can even visit every building on campus, not to mention study and learn from people who work inside of those buildings. And yet you've got these institutions you mentioned who, it seemed like in the founding of America, institutions like Harvard, Princeton were formed, a strong spiritual mission as well as an intellectual mission. They didn't see a conflict between those two things. Right. And then they lost their way, and then new universities came along and they lost their way. And then there are others that were formed by churches and they've lost their way. It almost seems like there's this gravitational pull away from truth toward just, I don't know, function. I mean, knowledge that's only prudential if it's somehow utilitarian. I don't know what it is. I'm wondering if you could diagnose it a little bit, because now you're in a university that's going to presumably experience that same gravitational pull. How do you define it? How do you resist it?
Well, when we made our first announcement about the university, our first public announcement, we announced that we were building a university dedicated to the fearless pursuit of truth. Mm-hmm. Pursuit of truth has to be at the center of institutions of higher education. And you're right. I mean, I think the pursuit of truth is something that has receded to the background at many institutions. And in some places, I don't know if I would say whole institutions are guilty of this, but people within these institutions often feel this way. The pursuit of truth is quixotic. It's a fool's errand. What is truth? There's no truth. Everything's relative in that. And what we find at universities today is this kind of like strange, I'll call it schizophrenia, where on the one hand, you have a significant number of people who make the case that truth is totally inaccessible to human beings, that everything is relative. All what we think of as truth is just the relationship of people in power and people making the case to meet their ends. And so it's impossible to actually know anything that's true. So you have relativism at one end, and at the other end you have what I would say people committed to ideology. The idea that no, there's one big truth, we know what it is, and the job of the university, let's call it social justice or however you want to characterize it, the job of the university, since we know what's actually true, is to become an agent of this truth and to be, to move society in a particular direction.
Wow.
Rather than being truth-seeking, to be activists, let's say politically activists. So institutions have this kind of schizophrenia where on the one hand, they don't believe in anything, and on the other hand, they believe in a single totalizing truth. And what we believe that the purpose of the university is to sail between those 2 points, to say, look, there are things that are true. And our job as human beings is to seek those things that are true. We may not have the capacity to discern everything that's true. Yes. I mean, we are limited in our scope. Right. But we have to have that North Star, that idea that truth is present and that we are obligated to move in its direction. And there are some things along the way that we can discover with a high degree of confidence. I mean, let's say truth of a quantitative nature. I think we've got the speed of light figured out and the distance of the sun. Right. I mean, there are things that are when they're quantifiable truths and testable. We with a high degree of confidence say this thing is true. You can still, sometimes even revisit those and try to test them, but as you test them, you usually have affirmation. They're right. There are other things in the world, and I would say these are qualitative truths that are more difficult, let's say, to pin down. Things like, what is justice? What is beauty? These are questions that human beings have struggled with as long as we've had human beings, and have come up with answers that are sometimes better or worse, but not yet final.
Yes.
And I would say the role of the university is to live within those two spaces, quantifiable truth and qualitative truth, and try to seek the best possible answers. There are institutions outside of universities that come up with answers that I would say are totalizing, churches or synagogues or mosques or things where they say, no, this is qualitatively true, this thing. And that's great. That's where that kind of that's where the focus of that kind of truth should be. But at least universities like ours, which are secular in nature, should maintain, I'd say, a kind of openness to the possibility, not that there are multiple truths, but that human beings, because we are flawed, because we are broken, because we are limited, have a difficult time pinning down absolute truth in certain areas.
I think that's really powerful. It's just because you can't know a truth exhaustively doesn't mean you can't search for it truly.
Right.
And so, but the way you talk about it at the very end there is interesting to me because, you said we know that humans are broken. You're starting with certain assumptions about the world that make the pursuit of truth something rather than something else. Like there are people who believe that humans aren't broken, that we are flawless, and simply maybe we're selfish, or I don't know, there could be some other thing, but it's not the fact that we are self-interested or that we have a sin nature. But you kind of have to start with some assumptions in order to make the pursuit of truth really something worthwhile.
Well, I think that's right. And look, I mean, anybody who thinks that human beings are perfect creatures and flawless, they tell them to spend 10 minutes with me and I will disabuse them of that notion very quickly. All the personal evidence I need to prove them wrong. Yes, look, I do think you have to begin from a position, and this seems axiomatic to me. It seems like it proves itself that we don't know everything there is to know, and that we very often are wrong and make mistakes. And we can overestimate our ability to understand the world. We can underestimate it too. I mean, I think, human beings have proven like we're actually pretty good at figuring some things out.
Yes.
I mean, we've done some pretty amazing things, as a human race. And so we're pretty good at figuring some things out. But I think particularly as individual human beings, we have to be mindful of the fact that, we are all just kind of stumbling through the world. We all have little bits and pieces of things that are right. We grab things that are wrong all the time. And this is why we have institutions called universities, because if we each bring together our own, let's say our own piece of a greater mosaic of truth seeking, the larger picture can become clearer. This is why, for example, I think the most important mode of education is not a lecture. A lecture is, I'm an expert in this and I'm going to tell you, you're going to take notes and you're going to send it back to me. But rather a seminar or a Socratic discussion, which says, let's all look at this question or this problem or this idea, and let's discuss it together as human beings and iterate intellectually on this to try and come up with better, more persuasive ideas along the way. To me, that the starting place, I mean, Aristotle says that wisdom begins with wonder, right? Wonder is a position of awe. It's looking at something and saying, wow, that's beyond me, or that's something above me or greater than me. And so starting with that perspective, with intellectual humility and approaching questions with that and saying, wow, there are things that I don't know. That's the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah, powerful. I was thinking in the world of psychology, I guess 1920s to the present, that area has been dominated by people like Abraham Maslow, who said, the whole hierarchy of needs, that essentially anything that we need to survive has to come to us from the outside, he says. Just like food, we can't, we don't internally generate our own food, it has to come from the outside. But then he said, everything else that's important has to come from the outside as well. So if a person engages in what you call sinful behavior, it's because they haven't had their needs met. And I wonder if that's kind of a point of departure for a lot of universities in the last 60 years. It'd be very difficult to establish a new university when you realize that, look, all it is just, if people are ignorant because they haven't had their needs met, people are evil because they haven't had their needs met. You're talking about a university based on sort of reinvigorating personal agency. Like you are coming to this university not to receive, not so that you can sit in a tent outside and have your meals catered. You're coming here because you intend to be something in the world. And
Absolutely.
it's you. It's not the world doing this to you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just kind of thinking aloud about this. How do you take students who have maybe very bright students, possibly somewhat neurotic because they've really focused on their academics. They've gotten all A's. They're coming to the university just assuming that their teachers at the university are going to do the same thing that their high school teachers did for them, which is spoon feed them knowledge. And that if they can successfully be spoon fed, that they will find success in life. How do you break that right off the bat? And you mentioned Socratic dialogue is one of the ways, but I'd love to hear kind of how that actually happens.
I mean, you have to kind of build your whole culture as an institution, your whole curriculum, your whole pedagogical approach around the idea of human agency, right? The responsibility that comes with human agency. So I like to say that a true education is not about the transfer of information; it's about transformation. So if you see your obligation as an institution to transform the character, the intellect, the soul of the students who are in your charge, then you build a different kind of institution. You build a different kind of curriculum. I'll give you an example. A very distinctive feature of the curriculum at University of Austin is what we call the Polaris Project. Okay, Polaris is the North Star, the thing that gives you direction. From the moment a student joins us, they begin on a 4-year-long journey towards a Polaris project. And the idea is that we ask them when they join us to start thinking about a moonshot project that will bring their greatest gifts to the world's greatest need.
Wow.
Yeah. The first part of this process, the first year of it is, well, what are your greatest gifts? Who are you? Like, what do you have to contribute? Like, what's really inside of you? And why is it there? And how do you tap that? And so the process of, let's say, accomplishing something important begins internally with understanding who you are and what your capabilities are. And then, over the course of the 4 years, we have a very systematic approach to this. Then you start making that concrete. What are the ways in which you could do something that would have value in the world? How do you define a project? How do you design a project? How do you pitch a project? How do you find resources? How do you move it towards completion? Our job as a university is we're building a university to create the next generation of builders and creators, innovators. So you have to teach them that they have agency, that they can bring things into the world that come from them, and that brings responsibility. So, that is, I mean, it's a core part of our curriculum. About a third of the curriculum is taken up by this Polaris project. And, we don't care what the subject might be anything. They could be doing a technologically oriented project. It could be a business. It could be a nonprofit thing. It could be something artistic, but it has to be something really, really ambitious.
Yes.
So if you think about that, the university tells that student from the moment they get here that your job isn't to receive, it's to build and create, and to equip yourself to be a builder and creator. And so our job is not to, give you a bunch of outlines, this is how you become a builder. It's to build the character that can achieve that end. A very different way of thinking about higher education.
Yeah. It's a reversal in a lot of ways of the direction that many institutions go. Man, I love that idea, the Polaris Project. I've heard of some different honors colleges. I know, like at Baylor, they have one of their honors colleges focuses on, you focus your entire education around a project that you develop, and then all the classes you take sort of feed into that. But the idea of making that project the centerpiece of your academic career sounds profound. If you can do that, then you can go outside to Washington, D.C. or wherever it happens to be and unfold those same skills along with the God-given gifts that you have and begin bringing about real change.
And look, that's that is my theory of change, right? That we're living in a world where everything is coming apart at the seams, everything's falling down, institutions are crumbling, and the only response to that is to build anew, to create. We could, yeah, and that's why we've committed to building a new university. But if we can build a university that then sends into the world thousands of builders,
Yes.
that's how the world changes, right? You create ethically oriented, self-reflected people who are committed to, not to running and trying to find a job at Goldman Sachs or, this and that, but to actually bring into the world something that reflects their greatest gifts, and, some of our students, and we don't even mind if the projects are completed. I mean, I want some of these projects to be so ambitious. Like, maybe you can't reach the end of the project in 4 years.
Yeah.
The education is in the journey. It's not in the completion. I mean, most schools are handing you a diploma or certificate. To us, that's the least important thing. We want our students when they graduate not to go to, some job interview and say, well, here's my transcript. We want them to go out there with the story of how they have changed over their time at the university and what they've learned to do with their skills and talents.
I think that's fantastic. We've had a lot of students who did go to work for Goldman Sachs, and a lot of them will tell me, look, I'm making this huge salary and this huge bonus, and I don't know why. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just obeying. I'm following orders. And I can easily imagine why some of them get the impression that, money comes easy. It doesn't really matter what I do because my personal actions don't really count for anything. Then they all of a sudden start voting differently. It's like this. It's not a promotion of agency. It's a removal of it, as opposed to someone who says, look, for the last 3 years, I've been obsessed with looking at this. And that's the skill that I can bring to any new pursuit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not Lutheran, but I was the dean of the Honors College at Valparaiso University, which is a Lutheran institution. And one of the things that I took away from that experience, Lutherans are very, very sharp on the idea of vocation, on the kind of calling that all people have to do something that contributes to the world. And you don't have to start a new company or invent a new wonder device or something to contribute to the world. You can contribute to the world in everything that you do. But I would say that those who have the privilege to attend a university have a higher responsibility to do things that matter in the world. They've been given the means and the tools to do things that are important. Look, your calling might be Goldman Sachs. Like, I don't mean to disparage any particular kind of life choice. But you need to be, if it is, that's something you need to believe in and be aware of. It can't be a default option, right? And so, understanding that sense of calling, I think, is very, very important. This is people, when I talk about this, people are often shocked because, we are a secular institution, yet we believe in vocation as a higher calling. We believe in transcendence. We believe in the pursuit of truth. And, most secular institutions today have been sort of stripped of these values. So that's one of the things we're trying to bring back is the idea that being a secular institution doesn't mean that you have to silo off things like truth or transcendence or calling, but they can be part of these institutions as well. And certainly, if any university should be interested in the totality of the human experience, and religiosity, faith, is one of the key elements of the human experience. In many cases, the key element. The idea that modern secular universities shunt that off and lock it in a closet somewhere is a betrayal of their purpose to be interested in all things human.
When you use the term secular, you mean non-sectarian. There's not a church or denomination that's behind this, not a particular religious group that's behind it. Is that how you're using the term?
Yeah, I mean, there's no faith affiliation,
Okay.
right? However, we are radically inclusive of faith traditions, whoever comes in, being able to live in their tradition, but also in, for example, the first 2 years of our undergraduate experience are taken up mostly by what we call the Intellectual Foundations program, which is a kind of comprehensive liberal arts program that looks at the great human questions through the lenses of philosophy and history and theology and the sciences and all these things. And so incorporated into our core Intellectual Foundations program are a significant number of sacred texts, significant number of theological works that are turned to and presented on their own terms, that are taken seriously on their own terms. I mean, this is, I think institutions don't have to be a faith-based institution to take these things very seriously.
Yes. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that makes sense. You've got something, but as we sort of wrap up the show, you've got something called the forbidden courses, which, okay, I'll admit, it got my attention, but I'd love to hear where that came from.
Well, so I'll tell you about it. And one thing that it indicates about our institution is, we also believe in having a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know, there's you could take joy in things like, being provocative or ironic in fun ways. So when we were first starting the university 2.5 years ago, we knew that it was going to be a few years before we could be authorized to start admitting degree-seeking students, which, by the way, we have been authorized, and our first class of freshmen is coming in the fall, and we're still accepting applications for that. So we're now a 4-year degree-granting university. But in the first couple of years of operation, while we were building out the university, we still wanted to do the kinds of things universities do, have classes and have seminars and that. And so the very first summer that we were in operation, which was summer 22, we decided, well, let's invite students from other universities to do a summer course with us where we can offer classes on things that maybe their university is not eager to offer classes on, or controversial topics, and whether it was on, gender or empire or, race relations and that, and present those topics in a kind of holistic, open-minded way and bring different people with different ideas to the table. And so in a kind of cheeky way, we're like, let's call them the forbidden courses, because these are the kind of classes these are the conversations that you can't have at most institutions.
Right. Yeah.
So, come over here, it's like, and we'll do it. And it was remarkably successful. I mean, we had students with thousands of applications. We had, I think, 80 spots the first year. And the students came, and they came from all over the world. And it was radically successful. And so we did it again the second summer, and it was even more successful. And we brought in top scholars and people from other institutions who wanted to have these kind of discussions. And so it's been a kind of continuing program for us, kind of let's call it an extracurricular program outside of our degree granting stream. But, it represents our kind of maverick spirit, the idea that we're not afraid to talk about anything. We're not afraid to look at any idea. Or if we're afraid of anything, we're just afraid of ignorance itself.
Yes.
And so we want to turn away from that.
I think that's fun. I mean, questions like gender, empire, those topics all come up at most universities, but the students are never presented with other ways to think about them, other texts that address those topics other than the ones that might indoctrinate someone to, as you were saying earlier, emerge as a social justice warrior. That's not really education, is it? That's not, I mean, you couldn't really say that you're an educated person if you've never had the opportunity to consider different viewpoints.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to Aristotle. Aristotle says the wise man is somebody who can hold two conflicting ideas in mind at the same time. Like you have to be able to look at things from different angles. And to do that, you have to be exposed to different ideas, and you have to be in conversation with people who have different ideas. I mean, that's how I mean, the mind is a muscle, and muscles can only be strengthened through opposition, through tension. This is how we become smarter and stronger, and how we stress test our own ideas and beliefs. We might end up with the same ideas and beliefs, and they're stronger because we've tested them. We might realize we're wrong about some things. I mean, that's, again, we are only partially right about most things. And so having this kind of commitment to these conversations is essential. And look, I think at most universities, as I said, there's kind of a script. There's sort of pre-packaged answers around these topics. I do want to note, I think in many universities, maybe most universities, there are courageous professors who are open-minded and who run classrooms that are freewheeling and open ideas. Sure. It's not, and there are students who want that. It's interesting. I think what I hear from professors now, who are generally liberal in the oldest sense of the term, open to ideas, is that it's not their institutions that are a problem. It's often the students. You get these kids in classrooms and they've kind of been weaponized already, many of them. And usually it's kind of a core, it's not even the whole. The professors tamp down conversation and the exchange of ideas, not because they want to, but because they themselves are anxious about what might be said, if there'll be consequences for ideas that kind of get out of hand, if they'll be reported on social media or reported to some administrator. And so there's a kind of suffocating quality to the instruction of many universities. So you have to break that open because they know, like, we're a university of trust. You and I can say whatever we'd like to say to each other. I have to listen. You have to listen. All ideas should be expressed. All ideas should be backed up by evidence. If you say something I don't like, I'm free to tell you I don't like it. I'm free to ask for clarification, but I'm not free to shout you down or punish you for that.
Yeah. Well, tell us, I don't know exactly when this show's going to be released, but you are still accepting students for fall of 2024. That's newsworthy because there are a lot of students right now who they've been accepted to different schools, but they're just having a really tough time because it just seems like they're not. There's something more that they're looking for, maybe, or maybe they're just indecisive. But tell us about the kind of student you're looking for, because maybe even at this point, they might want to throw their application your way.
Well, one of the reasons our process is still open is for that very reason. I mean, we realize that we're serving students at a time when all the givens about higher education are kind of up in the air, and great number of students who are coming to us have had real doubts about places they thought they wanted to go and are looking for other options. So we're trying to continue to be open to students at this particular moment in time. The kind of student we're looking for, someone who is committed to the principles that we hold, committed to open inquiry and freedom of conscience and civil discourse, that understands the value of these principles and wants to participate in a community that lives according to those principles. We're looking for students who are, adventurous and risk takers. I mean, this first class of students, they're going to help us build their own alma mater. I mean, we're at the point where the university is coming into being, and to be students who get to participate in that, I think it's a unique opportunity. And, the students we've attracted so far are just some of the most creative and interesting and, independent-minded young people I've ever seen. They give me such tremendous hope for the future. So we're looking for students who want to be part of that process. And we recognize, it's a big ask. Come to a brand new university and, we don't have any history to show you. We're still, determining like what are the student activities going to be and how are we going to build culture and all that, and you'll be a part of it. So one of the things that we've done is we have actually raised money so that each member of our initial cohort, our freshman class, will be given a full 4-year tuition scholarship.
Wow.
Which means we have to keep the class relatively small.
Right.
We're not going to go to more than 100 students, but we still have some spots available.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, we've got to release this show sooner rather than later because I'm thinking of some specific students I know who have said, I just don't know. I'm just not led to any of these places. I mean, it was fun to be on the campus. They gave a great tour. I met some cool people, but anyway, there could be this is great. This is great convergence. Man, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today. It really means a lot.
Look, it's been a great pleasure, and thank you for your questions. I mean, as you can tell, I have such passion for what we're doing. It's just wonderful to have the opportunity to talk with you about it.
Thanks, Pano.
Thank you.
Thank you to my guest, Pano Kanelos, for coming on the show. If you want more resources that help you live out a biblical worldview as a student, parent, educator, church leader, head over to summit.org/resources for articles, videos, ebooks, and more. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.